Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host with another marvelous video. This time, Magneto, the deadliest X-Men adversary, is among the strongest mutants of all time. Hey guys, this is going to be one massive video. Magneto is a legendary Marvel mutant villain, and for good reason. Having started out as an innocent child whose childhood was stolen from him during World War II, he soon developed into this radical mutant extremist because of what he went through. In this video, we'll be talking about his origins, what shaped him as a person and his ideologies, etc. We'll also discuss major story arcs involving him and some of his powers and abilities. No time to waste, so let's dig in. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
My name isn't Henrik. My name is Magneto.
Exploring the detailed origins and evolution of Magneto. Max Eisenhardt was born to a middle-class German Jewish family in the late 1920s. He'd later grow up to become Magneto. Jacob, his father, was a distinguished World War I veteran. Max was a content child who was adored by his parents. He even had a crush on Magda, a Romany girl who cleaned his school with her mother. The Eisenhardts were very comfortable and sorted out, yet intolerance was a constant in their lives. Max's mother was quick to express worries about the nation's escalating anti-Semitism, while Jacob played down any worry. After all, he'd served in the German army. How could the country desert him following such a test of allegiance and honor? Max, however, was forced to confront the growth of the Nazis and their odious worldview in school. His intellectual accomplishments had been equated with degenerate cunning and outright cheating by teachers and classmates who had started to single him out for shame and abuse. The lives of the Eisenhardts were in danger of being completely turned upside down. Whoever's familiar with their past may probably imagine what happened next. The Eisenhardts were deprived of their liberties, rights, employment, and home when Nazi Germany ascended to power on a wave of brutality and repression. Jacob's war service was disregarded by every authority he tried to appeal to. Max's uncle was publicly thrashed for shaming a German woman, and Magda and her mother silently left Max's school. The Eisenhardts escaped to Poland after Kristallnacht, only to run into the Nazis, who had already arrived in large numbers. Just before the infamous Ghetto Uprising, the family was driven into the Warsaw Ghetto, from which they eventually escaped. However, after her mother was held hostage, the woman on the outside who had offered to spirit them to freedom deceived them. The Eisenhardt family, which consisted of Max, his parents, and his younger sister, were killed in a line before being buried together. In the world of the X-Men, mutant abilities frequently appear around puberty, frequently when the teen in question is placed in a situation of great stress. Max's magnetic abilities materialized as the Nazi bullet rushed toward him, which is how he survived while the rest of his family perished. He emerged from the grave after the soldiers had gone, only to find himself unexpectedly and devastatingly alone himself. Max's period of independence was brief. He was transferred to Auschwitz, one of the several concentration camps the Nazis established in occupied Poland, after being apprehended once more. Max was made to perform labor as a Sonderkommando, a member of a crew responsible for removing the remains of those who had died in the camp's gas chambers. Max lost his faith in saviors as the years passed, becoming hollower and hollower. But Max did find a tiny bit of comfort in a reunion inside the camp. He tracked out Magda, the woman who had served at his school, and quietly started inciting uprising among his fellow inmates. When skeptical men objected, warning that a revolt would result in terrible Nazi vengeance, Max carefully listed out all the instances in which he had adopted those viewpoints. He claimed that he had numerous opportunities to retaliate against the Kristallnacht perpetrators, racist authorities, and camp officials. He'd refrained from taking them out of concern for the havoc the Nazis would wreak on the Jews. He questioned his unbelieving bunkmates, and guess what? They killed them all. Anyway, the Sonderkommandos rose up on October 7, 1944, much like in our world. Max and Magda fled into the Polish countryside during the ensuing turmoil. Under false names, Magda and Max made their way into the Carpathian Mountains in Eastern Europe. Their daughter Anya was born, and they later became the Magnus family. Max, who had grown up in the city, started to chafe at their tranquil existence because he found the leisurely pace of country life to be tedious. Max also desired to relocate to a more populated area in order to find work as a carpenter and perhaps pursue a college education. They relocated to the Soviet city of Vinnytsia against Magda's wishes. Tragic events happened on his first day in the city. Max obtained work on a construction site after relocating his family to an inn. The foreman tried to defraud Max of his day's pay after noticing his difficult housing situation and absence of contacts in the city. In a flash of wrath, Max summoned his magnetic abilities once more and threw a crowbar at the foreman's face. When Max returned to the inn from the construction site, he was horrified to see that his small daughter was inside and the building was on fire. Max began to try to save Anya from the burning building after realizing that he could use his abilities to surround himself and Magda in a protective shield. Police, who had been contacted by the foreman, managed to halt him. As Max attempted to escape and save his daughter from the flames, a mob gathered and restrained him. They didn't let him go until Anya's body had hit the ground in front of the throng after falling from the building. Max lost control of his abilities and released a potent electromagnetic pulse that killed several bystanders and police officers. Magda labeled her husband a monster and escaped into the night after being horrified by his destructive abilities and corrosive emotions. Anya's remains were interred in the woods by Max when he fled the city. In order to elude capture and look for Magda, he adopted a second new identity and adopted the guise of the Sinti Romani, Eric Magnus Lenscher. Magneto visited Israel, a recently established country in the persona of Eric Lenscher. When they both worked at a psychiatric hospital, this is where he first met a young Charles Xavier. They became friends while tending to Gabrielle Haller, a patient who was catatonic, and they had disagreements regarding the place mutants should have in society. Neither guy acknowledged having mutant abilities, but they firmly defended their ideas of mutant supremacy and coexistence. They were forced to use their talents when an evil group known as Hydra, headed by a Nazi named Baron Strucker, arrived to kidnap Haller, creating yet another incredibly tense situation. It found out that Haller's memory had been permanently imprinted with the location of a stash of illegal Nazi gold. To save Haller, Charles and Eric had to employ their secret talents. Shortly after joining forces for a rescue mission, Eric came to the conclusion that he and Charles couldn't come to an agreement regarding their divergent views on the future of mutants, so he went off on his own. Eric Lenscher and Charles Xavier were byproducts of their surroundings. Growing up in a wealthy American family, Xavier had a largely trouble-free existence. He was given the freedom to develop his mutant abilities gradually in a secure environment, and with everyone's implicit consent. Lenscher, on the other hand, had spent his entire life learning about the severe cruelty that people can inflict on those they view as being different. His family was murdered because of his ancestry. He'd been driven out of time each time he'd exposed his abilities to people. He simply couldn't understand Charles's perspective on the coexistence of mutants and people. Due to his time serving in the Sonderkommando, Eric is fully aware of the location of Nazi gold caches, such as the ones Haller is aware of. He'd acquired the skill of removing gold from the teeth of slain Jews as part of his job for the Nazis. It only seemed sense that he would spend the gold he'd taken to stop another slaughter, this time against mutant kind. He left with the gold that Hydra was after and used it to finance his strategy for world peace, mutant dominance. Magneto first established an off-world base of operations. Mutants who were disillusioned but still supported Magneto's cause found refuge on asteroid M. He found a sympathetic audience among those who had endured persecution because of their innate abilities when he offered his ideas for a society ruled by mutants, or as he put it, Homo Superior, and won their support. His Brotherhood of Evil Mutants attacked military installations and other targets in an effort to bring down the human order. But Xavier's tenacious band of X-Men always managed to get the better of him. It didn't take long for the X-Men to adopt the idea of secession, given the themes of discrimination and the struggle for civil rights at its core. In an effort to establish a safe haven for mutants, Magneto made an attempt to conquer the imaginary nation of Santo Marco. He was successful in conquering the nation, but he was unable to defend it from an X-Men-led onslaught. In an effort to eliminate his sole rival, he planted nuclear bombs throughout the nation. It was only the fourth problem, thus he failed. But this wasn't the final time he tried to make his vision of a homeland for mutants a reality. Magneto has never clung to his belief in complete mutant dominance for very long. With their penchant for breaking comic book conventions and exploring character history, the new generation of X-Men authors in the 1980s didn't ignore the franchise's big bad. Magneto immediately started to have second thoughts after almost killing Kitty Pryde in an altercation with the X-Men. Magneto questioned how far he'd be ready to go to ensure mutant peace because Pryde is a young Jewish woman. Since then, he's changed his mind multiple times, even assuming the position of headmaster of Charles Xavier's school at one point. Although he served as the leader of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, he simply can't seem to remain evil. However, it goes without saying that each new generation of writers must explore the contradiction between Magneto's militancy and Charles's gentle notion of harmony. As a result, Magneto frequently dons the helmet and sets out to plan new atrocities against humanity.
Your way, Charles. I tried to be like them. but it always ends the same.
Thoughts behind his creation. In 1963, writer Stan Lee and illustrator Jack Kirby developed the character Magneto. He initially appeared in X-Men #1 when he established himself as the team's very first adversary. According to the character's creator Stan Lee, he didn't think of Magneto as a bad guy. He was merely attempting to retaliate against the discriminatory and racist individuals. Because mankind wasn't treating mutants correctly, he was attempting to protect them and planned to teach humanity a lesson. Of course, he posed a threat, but he never considered him to be a bad guy. Lee also disclosed that, rather than just being an old buddy, Magneto was initially intended to be Professor Xavier's brother. When Roy Thomas and Neil Adams wrote the iconic phrase, "Perhaps clothes do make the man," they didn't reveal his face without the mask until X-Men #62.
This time they're going to pay for it! The whole world will learn what Dr. Magneto's power can
Magneto's first appearance in the animated universe came in Spider-Man, 1967, exploring his cameos and appearances in earlier animated shows. In The Revenge of Dr. Magneto, a magnetic gun-wielding scientist by the name of Dr. Mato Magneto was fought by Spider-Man in the 1967 Spider-Man animated series. The persona was very loosely modeled on the comic book character Magneto, and he resembled Albert Einstein more so than Eric Magnus Lancia. Additionally, neither this character nor his superpowers are mutants. Because he's German, his name is pronounced Magneto rather than Magneto. Magneto, voice actor John Stevenson, briefly overcame the team in The Menace of Magneto in the 1978 Fantastic Four animated series. He's not portrayed as a mutant in this scene. Instead, he's just a supervillain with ordinary goals, like robbing a bank and a lot of strength. He uses his magnetic abilities to maneuver a strange car-like object around rather than flying. Reed Richards used a wooden rifle to deceive him, which led to his defeat. So, in episode When Magneto Speaks, People Listen of the 1981 standalone Spider-Man animated series, Magneto made an appearance. In one version, he went under the identity Mr. M, commandeered and took control of a number of communication satellites, and then wanted $100 million in gold in exchange for the return of global control. Spider-Man was able to defeat him by utilizing a microwave relay to reflect Magneto's magnetic might back at him. But Magneto was able to flee. In the prison plot, Magneto made a comeback in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and tried to set his fellow mutants free. Michael Ryle lent his voice to him. In A Firestar Is Born, the figure also made a brief cameo appearance in flashback as Firestar told the X-Men about her past. Despite his Spider-Man TV roles, he's only featured in 2 issues of a Spider-Man comic book. In the animated X-Men pilot, X-Men Pride of the X-Men, Magneto battled the X-Men for the first time in an actual animated appearance. His voice actor was Earl Bowen.
Possessing the power of magnetism, he began calling himself Magneto.
Magneto in X-Men, the animated series. David Hemblin provided the voice of Magneto in the X-Men television series, which featured him prominently. Strangely, despite the fact he debuted on the show as a villain, his persona spent more time battling alongside the X-Men against shared foes like the Sentinels and Mr. Sinister than as the heartless evil he'd previously been portrayed as in prior series like Pride of the X-Men. Magneto first appears in the series in the 3rd episode, Enter Magneto, where he attempts to start a war among humanity and mutant kind by attacking an army base and almost launching nuclear warheads, although they're stopped from reaching their objectives by the X-Men. Magneto first appears in the series in a brief cameo in the initial episode, Night of the Sentinels Part 1. On a TV screen, Jubilee unintentionally turns on with her powers. He's shown to be an old buddy of Xavier and goes by the name Magnus. Magnus, though, is persuaded that humans and mutants can't cohabit after a violent battle with an army, and the two parted ways. In the following episode, Deadly Reunions, he returns and attacks a chemical plant in an effort to get Xavier to confront him. Xavier accepts his challenge, and the two engage in combat after taking down Cyclops, Rogue, and Storm. But Xavier torments him with flashbacks to his early years during the Holocaust, sending Magneto running in pain. He kidnaps Senator Kelly in the first season finale to try to start a war again, but a troop of Sentinels stop him. Magneto joins forces with the X-Men to defeat the Sentinels after Master Mode and the other Sentinels rebel against their creators and pose a threat to the entire planet. In the process, he saves Charles Xavier's life. He appears in almost every episode of the 2nd season, which follows him and Professor Xavier as they explore the Savage Land after being stripped of their powers. They're saved from Mr. Sinister by all of the X-Men at the season's conclusion, and they're given their powers back. He constructs Asteroid M in Season 4 to serve as a sanctuary for mutants who feel persecuted on Earth. Despite having good intentions, his closest subordinate Fabian Cortez betrays him, setting off a chain of events that makes him realize that the world would never again accept him as the leader of the asteroid. As a result, he permits the base to be destroyed. Magneto joins forces with Apocalypse in the 4th season finale in the hopes that the superhero will utilize his abilities to bring his wife back to life. Magneto aids the X-Men in thwarting Apocalypse after learning of his plans to annihilate reality. When the Beast, Forge, Mr. Sinister, and Amelia Vogt inform him that his son Quicksilver has been abducted by the Phalanx in the second of the 2-part 5th season premiere, he's disheartened by the loss of his sanctuary and doesn't care at all about the Phalanx's impending assimilation of humanity. To destroy the Phalanx and free everyone they'd imprisoned or assassinated, he joins forces with them. His final appearance comes in the series finale, Graduation Day, when he's amassed a massive army of rebellious mutants and is ready to rule the world when Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey inform him that Professor Xavier is passing away. Magneto persistently contacts Lilandra Naramani using his and Xavier's combined powers, and she brings Xavier to her planet where there is a possibility that it can be healed. He's last seen standing outside the home with the X-Men as Professor X leaves. X-Men, the animated series, has continuity issues, as do many television programs. For one thing, despite being a long-standing friend of Charles Xavier's, Magneto is unknown to the X-Men in the episode when he first appears, suitably named Enter Magneto. However, as the story goes on, a flashback in Cold Comfort has Magneto battling Iceman. Since Iceman was the only person fighting Magneto in the flashback and was absent from Enter Magneto, it's plausible that only Iceman is aware of him. He had major roles in XMen Evolution and Wolverine and the X-Men. The X-Men are unaware of Magneto's existence for the first season of the program, with the exception of Professor Xavier. Wolverine is the first X-Man to do so, albeit Magneto starts to pose a more immediate threat in the first season finale. He assembles a team of mutants in the first season with the help of his operative Mystique, and even enlists his own son Quicksilver to spy on them. He sets the Brotherhood against the X-Men in the first season finale and takes the Victor to Asteroid M in an effort to persuade them to support him and use a gene amplifier to continue building their powers as he had done. Although flashbacks show that they've been at odds ever since Magneto snatched Mystique from her new son, Nightcrawler, their betrayal causes him to lose Mystique, and their feud lasts the whole second season. After the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants successfully fend off a Sentinel that was intended to wipe out every known mutant, Magneto personally recruits a new team, the Acolytes, uses the same technology used to create Captain America to reverse his aging, and finally informs the general public that there are mutants. All of these events take place in the second season. During this moment, his daughter Wanda is revealed. Wanda despises Magneto for having abandoned her when she was a youngster and placed her in a mental institution. Greg Johnson, the lead author of XMen Evolution, when asked about what specific event led to Magneto institutionalizing Wanda, said that no specific event occurred. He'd spent years attempting to discipline an aggressive, unruly youngster whose abilities threatened to be extremely harmful if he didn't get them under control. Until he employs the mutant mastermind to alter her memories and cast him in a new light, she pursues him assiduously. In seasons 3 and 4 of the show, Magneto devotes himself to preventing the mutant Apocalypse's awakening. However, all of his efforts are unsuccessful, and after Apocalypse awakens, Magneto is transformed into one of his 4 horsemen, after initially believing that Apocalypse had killed him. In the concluding episode, Ascension Part 2, he's set free from this captivity, and his 2 children are the last people to see him. Charles Xavier reveals at the end of the episode that he saw the future in Apocalypse's head, and among the visions he saw was Magneto becoming an ally of the X-Men and training the new mutants, just like he did in the comics. In this series, Magneto uses a gadget on Asteroid M to accelerate his growth and raise the bar on his talents. Evidently, this development moves him to a new level of being a mutant. He makes mention to this when he confronts Apocalypse, saying that they're engaged in a conflict of higher evolutionaries. This is supported by Caliban's assertion that while Magneto is beyond his ability to locate, any other mutant is still within his grasp.
You can let me out of here, I need a pee.
His constant presence in the X-Men movies has been captivating. Magneto is represented by Michael Fassbender and Sir Ian McKellen in the X-Men movie series, Younger Self. The African-American civil rights activist Malcolm X had a direct influence on how his character develops in the movies. Brett Morris and Bill Milner played the pre-teen incarnations of the character in X-Men First Class. He was a Holocaust survivor and went by the name Eric Magnus Lenscher, which was also his name in the comics at the time. Despite being close friends, he and Charles Xavier are now rivals because of his goal of ensuring mutant prosperity, but only for as long as he has control of it. Magneto's defense against mental assault in the X-Men movies comes from his helmet, which contains a psychic shielding component rather than from his inherent natural abilities. Magneto is no longer susceptible to mind control or telepathy after stealing Shaw's helmet, as was the case in the first two movies. Compared to how he's portrayed in comic books, his abilities are far more constrained. While he's demonstrated almost limitless mastery over magnetism in the comics, in the movies he's mostly only able to manipulate metal. Despite having disagreements with Xavier, Magneto consistently shows love and respect for his old friend while recognizing his accomplishments to the mutant race. Currently, Magneto has appeared in 8 X-Men movies. X-Men. Magneto is a strong mutant in the movie X-Men with nearly infinite abilities. He serves as the movie's primary adversary. However, the presence of mutants is now widely known, and there's a heated argument about whether or not they should be given the same rights as ordinary people, or whether they should be kept apart entirely. Senator Robert Kelly's proposed Mutant Registration Act, which would require all mutants to come forward and register, is currently up for debate in the US Senate. On that particular day, Magneto is present and makes an attempt to convince the Senate to vote against registering mutants, but Senator Kelly shouts him down. He claims that he'd seen and heard the identical speeches before, when the Nazis had screamed out against Jews, when Charles Xavier, an old acquaintance, confronts him. Then, as he works to establish mutant dominance, he requests that Xavier not stand in his way. With a high-tech device driven by his own magnetic energy and mounted on the torch of the Statue of Liberty, Magneto tries to mutate the world's leaders. He kidnaps Rogue to serve as the machine's power source because it could be fatal. Magneto was unaware that the device would result in human deaths by causing them to lose their chemical structure, as seen in Senator Kelly. Magneto doesn't care or believe Jean Grey and Storm when they warn him of the hazards of the machine. In the end, Cyclops uses an optic blast to knock Magneto to the ground and destroy the machine, while Wolverine attacks Magneto from atop the flame. Magneto ends up imprisoned in a plastic cell. X2. Magneto makes a comeback as an anti-hero in X2. He formed a short-term alliance with the X-Men after breaking out of jail after Mystique gave a security guard a suspension of iron particles, and they worked together to stop William Stryker's plan to exterminate all mutants. But after Magneto thwarts Stryker's plan to use a modified Cerebro operated by Xavier and controlled by Stryker's own kid to exterminate all mutants, he and Mystique decide to force Xavier to attempt to exterminate all regular people. The X-Men arrive just in time to wake up Xavier and foil Magneto's scheme, as he and Mystique and Pyro escape the facility in a chopper with Magneto. Due to McKellen's experiences with the last film, where he found the costume to be somewhat constricting and the helmet to be especially hard to wear, Magneto's costume and helmet were slightly altered for this movie for better performance. In addition to these costume modifications, Magneto is now wearing a silver collar pin that closely resembles the patterns on the comic book character's helmet. X-Men The Last Stand. Magneto is back as the primary adversary in X-Men The Last Stand and has added new members to the Brotherhood of Mutants. He and his Brotherhood attack the facility with the goal of eliminating the firm that created the cure for the mutant gene after finding that it was developed by a significant corporation. Magneto is alarmed when Phoenix vaporizes Xavier in front of him after Magneto convinces Phoenix to join his side after learning of Jean Grey's reappearance. Magneto puts his misgivings about the cure aside in this situation. Magneto expresses sincere sorrow over Xavier's passing after his apparent death. Since, in chess, the pieces go first, Magneto had no qualms about deliberately sending scores of his mutant followers against anti-mutant weapons while he was safely out of range during the Brotherhood's attack on Alcatraz, lifting and manipulating the Golden Gate Bridge. In the climactic confrontation, Wolverine and Beast collaborate to administer Magneto the cure that deprives him of his abilities. He tells Jean, feeling defeated, "This is what they want for all of us." When Phoenix unleashes her powers and goes on a rampage, he pulls back from Alcatraz with the rest of the mutants and humans after feeling awful about the bad things he's done in the past. In the climactic scene, he's shown to be alone and repentant. He reaches out for a metal chess piece and is able to just barely move it, showing that his powers are regaining some of their former strength. X-Men First Class. In the 2011 movie X-Men First Class, Michael Fassbender plays a younger and alternative Eric Lensher Magneto as one of the movie's two protagonists, alongside a young Charles Xavier. When Lensher was taken from his parents by Nazi forces in a concentration camp in this movie, his abilities started to emerge, twisting open a metal fence separating him and his parents. Dr. Klaus Schmidt was present when this happened and asked Eric to move a coin to demonstrate his power. once more. Then, to force an emotional demonstration of his dominance, he threatens and kills Eric's mother. Eric spends the most of his post-war life pursuing Schmidt, who's now known as Sebastian Shaw, and it's during this pursuit that he meets Charles Xavier in 1962. He eventually joins Division X, a CIA task group comprised of mutants, and helps the organization look into Shaw. Eric becomes close friends with Xavier and Raven, who come up with the names Mystique and Magneto, respectively. Just before Shaw strikes Division X's covert facility and compels the squad to disband, Charles and Eric learn Shaw's plot to start World War III by persuading the Soviet Union to station nuclear missiles in Cuba. In order to fight Shaw's objectives, the remaining mutants congregate in Xavier's house, and Xavier assists Eric in finding a different way to use his innate power. Eric brings Shaw's nuclear submarine from the water to the beach during the fight with Shaw and his soldiers in the Caribbean. Once inside, Eric removes Shaw's helmet to allow Xavier access to his mind and stop Shaw. Eric, in an ironic turn of events, dons Shaw's helmet and admits that he shares Shaw's exclusivist views on mutant kind. He then murders Shaw using the same coin from the camp. After seeing the mutant clash, both American and Soviet forces focus their weapons toward the shore. Eric diverts the missiles back toward the human vessels after stopping them in mid-air, defying Xavier's requests. Eric blocks all of Moira McTaggart's shots, one of which hits Xavier in the spine and renders him paralyzed. He loses concentration as a result, causing the missiles to launch into the water. Lensher splits ways with Xavier over their divergent perspectives on the interaction between mutants and humans, taking Mystique and Shaw's crew with him. Magneto liberates Emma Frost from confinement in the movie's climactic finale while sporting a look reminiscent of his debut in the comic book. The character was initially intended for the spin-off movie X-Men Origins Magneto, which was scrapped after spending years in production hell since its plot overlapped with that of X-Men First Class. The Wolverine. In a mid-credit sequence for The Wolverine, as Logan returns to the United States following the events of the movie, Sir Ian McKellen and Professor Xavier make a brief cameo appearance. As a television commercial for Trask Industries plays, both notify Logan in an airport of the government's horrible new weapon that might wipe out all mutant life. The movie also reveals that Magneto reclaimed his abilities, stopping Wolverine from attacking him by shaking coins and other metallic things. X-Men. Days of Future Past. In X-Men Days of Future Past, Magneto was portrayed by Sir Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender in the same roles, with the younger Magneto serving as an anti-hero until taking over as the antagonist in the past, and the older Magneto serving as a supporting protagonist in the devastated future. Magneto joins forces with the X-Men's remains in a monastery in China in the future plotline in which the Sentinels eliminated the majority of mutants and later killed regular humans as well. He and Professor Xavier believe that the best course of action would be to thwart Mystique's 1973 murder of Bolivar Trask in order to stop the formation of the Sentinels. When Kitty Pryde transports Wolverine's consciousness to his earlier incarnation, the events of that time coincide with an impending Sentinel attack on the mutant stronghold. By launching the Blackbird at Sentinels, Magneto manages to take out a number of them, but he's ultimately impaled by a piece of one of the fallen Sentinels. Magneto begins his struggle with his wound as he retreats into the monastery, telling Charles that he laments their prolonged disagreements over differences of opinion. He stays there until the Sentinels break into the stronghold, just as young Xavier and Wolverine have successfully altered the future after having valiantly defended his teammates. Back in 1973, Wolverine makes contact with a young Beast and Xavier, then enlists Quicksilver to help him free the young, ruthless, and cruel Magneto from his imprisonment beneath the Pentagon. Magneto had been imprisoned there since 1963 for his alleged involvement in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, though he continued to maintain his innocence. At the Paris Peace Accords, the young Magneto aids them in stopping Mystique from killing Trask, but later decides to try killing Mystique to prevent the dystopian future, betraying her and the others. After failing to kill her, he makes the decision to act on his own. At their White House unveiling, he commandeers the Sentinels to assault the crowd, laces the prototype Sentinels with steel to control them, and then constructs a wall around the White House using the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium. Young Magneto uses his abilities to direct the Sentinels at Logan and young Beast, while young Beast engages the Sentinels. Young Magneto is offended by Logan and tries to stop him by hitting him. A fight breaks out as Logan is attacked by bits of metal that young Magneto has thrown. Wolverine fights back but ultimately ends up being flung into the Potomac River. Young Magneto then removes the safe room from the White House, addresses the television cameras about the superiority of mutants, and gets ready to assassinate President Richard Nixon and his cabinet. After that, Nixon shoots Magneto in the neck while actually being Mystique in disguise. Due to his attack on Nixon, young Magneto is branded a mutant terrorist, and the leaders of the world band together to find him. His acts also highlight the danger the Sentinels bring if they're misused and used against humanity, which eventually contributes to the cancellation of the Sentinel program and prevents the dystopian future from occurring. Magneto isn't to be found in the recently altered future, leaving his destiny undetermined. XMen Apocalypse. In the 2016 movie XMen Apocalypse, Fassbender returns to his role as Magneto, who begins the film as an enemy before changing back to a hero at the end. After the events of the 1970s, Eric spent the following 10 years working as a metalworker and raising a daughter and wife in Poland. His wife was aware of his past, and his daughter had an unknown mutant power that allowed her to control animals. Someone calls the police when he utilizes his abilities to save a co-worker at the office. His attempt to surrender himself in order to protect his family results in his daughter's mutant power turning the local woodland animals against the police, which leads to the deaths of his loved ones when an arrow is unintentionally shot and pierced both his wife and daughter. Magneto uses his daughter's locket to kill every cop before going to his factory to do the same to the employees. After his recruiter kills the employees before transporting Eric to Auschwitz, he ultimately becomes a recruit for N-Sabarner and awakens his full ability to act as his horseman. Eric informed N-Sabarner of his friend's whereabouts when Charles Xavier attempted to reach his former companion via Cerebro to persuade him to give up his desire for vengeance. He participates in the kidnapping of his old friend by attracting Charles's wheelchair to them with his magnetic powers. Magneto uses his enhanced ability to terraform the Earth under the direction of his master. He's asked to assist Charles and the team in taking down Apocalypse by Mystique and his unidentified son, Quicksilver, but he waits until the two are ambushed and almost killed by the villain before agreeing to do so. Eric works with Jean Grey to reconstruct the X-Mansion after the war using his skills, but he rejects Charles's invitation to stay and leaves instead. Dark Phoenix. 2019's Dark Phoenix features Fassbender reprising his role. By the time of the movie's plot, Magneto lives on the mutant refuge Genosha. Magneto suspects Jean Grey of killing someone after noticing a bloodstain on her blouse when she visits him for assistance and inquires about how he was able to suppress her impulse to kill others. Magneto then confronts Jean Grey about it. The military team arrives and demands to arrest Jean after she caused disruption during the incident in Red Hook, breaking up their argument. After Jean tears out one chopper, the military mission is then all but destroyed, and Magneto struggles to get the men to leave. He then attacks Jean and exiles her from Genosha. When Magneto, Ariki, and Selene, two mutants, join Hank to hunt down and murder Jean, Hank McCoy arrives in Genosha and reveals that Jean is the one who killed Raven. The X-Men, made up of Xavier, Storm, Scott, and Kurt, confront the group. After failing to kill her, Jean tosses Magneto out of the building, and the military operation sedates and arrests all the mutants before transporting them to a facility on a train. Magneto then encounters Jean and the Debari chief, Vuk, who controls her. Jean is apparently the Dark Phoenix. Then, after admitting his mistake and obstructing Jean's memories, Xavier begs Magneto and Hank for forgiveness. The Debari army attacks the train, and the factions work together to defeat them. Later, Magneto is seen battling the Debari armies before being defeated by Vuk. Then Jean wakes up, builds shields to defend her comrades, lifts the train, and slams it into the ground. As the Debari and Vuk face Jean, Magneto and the other X-Men watch as she kills them all and sails into space, presumably vanished. Following that, Jean is honored as the new name of Xavier's school, and Xavier steps down from his position as headmaster to be succeeded by Hank. The two then make up after Magneto meets Xavier in Paris, invites him to a game of chess, and offers him his alliance after praising Xavier for his honesty throughout the years. X-Men, The Trial of Magneto, a comic book story arc that thrilled the fans. This is the story that talks about Wanda dying. More specifically, it talks about the events surrounding her death and subsequent resurrection, along with the trial that takes place for her apparent murder. So, in these issues, we see that Wanda has somehow been abducted and killed. At first, Magneto is suspected and he fights back instantly. There's a full-fledged battle between him and a bunch of other mutants before his son Quicksilver comes in to stop him finally. Later, as the issues progress, we see that it wasn't Magneto, but actually Toad who committed the crime. However, even this is a bit hard to accept because he takes credit for the act far too willingly, meaning there might be something or someone else involved here. Time travels back and forth throughout this narrative. It basically acts as Scarlet Witch's means of atoning against herself in the sight of mutant kind by revealing her murderer and the motive for the murder. That's the simplest way to summarize it without giving away some of the twists in that manner. In essence, Scarlet Witch's death was meant to allow her to establish Eldritch Orchard, creating a timeless location where Krakoans may keep their memories. They could also bring back mutants who had been before Professor X was able to maintain backups. Scarlet Witch opted to take her own life while Magneto described the Krakoan resurrection to her, hence it was indeed suicide. Magneto was aware that it would occur, and he and Wanda were ultimately responsible for framing Toad for the entire incident. Toad gladly accepts credit, indicating that Magneto most likely coerced him into it. Some of his other major comic book story arcs. Coming out of the shadows. A long time of hiding later, we see that Max has come back into the spotlight. However, this time he simply goes by the name of Magneto and has acquired a group of mutants to help him with his agenda. His notoriety grew over time and humans began fearing his name. One time, we see that he tried to attack Cape Citadel. Even though he did have a group of evil mutants helping him out, they were stopped by the X-Men of the time. This group of evil mutants that Magneto had rounded together consisted of the Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Toad, and Mastermind. This was part of an issue that came out many years ago, so no one knew at the time that Wanda and Quicksilver were Magneto's children. Given that Magneto had grown up believing that mutants will never be treated as equals, he used the Brotherhood to overthrow the human race. This obviously didn't go unnoticed, and the Brotherhood's attacks were often thwarted by Professor X and his X-Men. The X-Men weren't the only superhero group that Magneto has fought against, by the way. He's also fought against the Avengers as well as the Fantastic Four. So it does go to show that Magneto will try as hard as possible to achieve his goals, irrespective of what obstacle may lie in his path. Later, there was even a part where Magneto creates a mutant called Alpha, the ultimate mutant. Magneto may have created this particular mutant to help him with his plans. However, this didn't work out particularly well for him, because Alpha turned him and a few others into a toddler. This was not just a big backfire on Magneto's plans, but was also a bit funny, to be honest, seeing baby Max in his big helmet and cape. Professor X was given custody of the child, but he gave Max over to Moira McTaggart. She ended up raising Magneto for some time before the Shi'ar agent Eric the Red turned him back into his normal adult self. Interesting bit here is that he was transformed into the age where he is at his prime. Despite this, the whole ordeal seems to have changed him to an extent. He was shaken to his core, but still kept working on his objective to end humanity for good. In his current condition, where he's stronger than ever before, he fights the X-Men on Muir Island before disappearing for a good long while. He'd sustained some grave wounds from Wolverine in a subsequent battle and needed to hide to recover. This was enough to put at least a temporary stop to his plans. Magneto creates the X-Men. In Earth 295, Charles Xavier has passed away. He was murdered by his own son, David, and had never formed the X-Men to begin with. David had apparently traveled back in time in order to kill Magneto. David's mindset was that if Magneto died early on, then his father's dream of human mutant peace might just be realized. During the Age of Apocalypse, however, this Earth needed a team to defend it against Apocalypse and his horsemen. This is where Magneto would take up the role of leader and form this universe's X-Men. The X-Men from this universe would consist of many of the typical mutant heroes that we've seen in the 616 universe, but will also include some of the savior-type villains as well, like Sabretooth. Max had decided to fight against Apocalypse to honor his fallen friend, Charles. This battle waged on for years as Apocalypse slowly took over North America. In the process, Magneto would lose his daughter, Wanda, and this would send him into a crazed rage. The four horsemen of this Apocalypse were Mikhail Rasputin, Colossus's brother, Mr. Sinister, Holocaust, and Abyss. We also find out that in this universe, Max marries Rogue and together they have a child that they named Charles in memory of their fallen friend, Professor X. Later on, we also see that Apocalypse has managed to kidnap both Magneto and his son, Charles. However, Rogue and the other X-Men, also including X-Man, managed to find him and save them. They stormed Apocalypse's palace with their full might to try and stop the crystallization of M'Kraan, since that would lead to the destruction of reality as we know it. In the ensuing battle, we see Magneto using his abilities to overpower Apocalypse and finish him. However, when nuclear warheads were armed and the world was going to end, some bright white power came in the last second and saved the world. It's well known that Magneto wasn't the one to stop them, but he was known as a hero around the world. Magneto created the Bureau of Mutant Affairs to find and capture all of his former allies while focusing on Sinister's whereabouts after Apocalypse had been stopped for about a year or so. Magneto was shown to have known that Jean Grey, a mutant, was the one who deactivated the bombs, but he decided to keep this information a secret in order to create a new world where mutants and humans would coexist together peacefully. The Sinister Six, a group of deluded mutants who exposed Magneto's identity, also made an appearance later, along with Jean Grey and Mr. Sinister. Many mutants on both sides of the war, including Magneto's son Pietro, died, but the evil man was ultimately vanquished after Magneto liberated Jean from Sinister's control. Due to his phony heroic deeds, Magneto is imprisoned. A couple of years later, the next Apocalypse, Weapon X, kills him. No More Mutants. Magneto appeared and demanded that his daughter be given into his custody after Wanda accidentally dissolved the Avengers and knocked herself out. The Avengers and the X-Men discovered Magneto was still alive at this point and that it was Zorn, not him, who was responsible for the attacks on New York City. The Avengers regretfully delivered Wanda to Magneto at the request of a grieving father. After that, they spent their last few months in Genosha, living in peace, father and daughter. Magneto kept an eye on his daughter as Xavier kept her unconscious. On the other hand, Wanda was viewed as a threat by the X-Men and the newly formed Avengers, who had plans to either take her in or, if needed, have her killed. Magneto's son Pietro begged his father to save her. In response, Magneto argued that he was powerless to change the circumstances and was out of alternatives. Wanda was undoubtedly his flesh and blood, and he'd give his life in order to protect her. However, Wanda was also clearly suffering from a mental breakdown and posed a danger to both herself and others. He may be a father, but he couldn't ignore his conscience when it came to protecting the lives of others. The united might of the X-Men and the new Avengers then challenged Magneto. Before they could respond, the Earth abruptly turned white, and when it did, mutants had replaced other species as the dominant species, and humanity was in risk of being extinct. With Magneto as the head of Genosha, the world's dominant superpower at this point, mutants dominated almost every position of power on Earth. Mutants now dominate the globe and enact laws that are harmful to humans while they wait for them to die off, naturally. It pretty much becomes the world as it was before, but the roles of humans and mutants are reversed. Wolverine and a strange lady by the name of Layla Miller carried out a risky invasion of Magneto's headquarters in order to release Wanda from his custody. However, it was found that Pietro had convinced Wanda to alter the universe into this image, not Eric. As the cosmos began to crumble around them and reality returns to normal, Wanda says 3 simple words: no more mutants. Magneto and 99% of the mutant population of the globe will no longer possess superpowers when everything returns to normal. This day would be known as M-Day. This was an enormous turning point in Marvel and mutant history, as this would go on to become a massively impactful event. Magneto's heartbreaking origin. Time is frequently a movable target in comics. Tony Stark's origin, for instance, originally referred to the Vietnam War, but is typically changed to reflect the most recent overseas American military operation. This enables the writers to set the characters in the present day and prevents them from being too elderly to be realistic action heroes. But because of how the Holocaust formed Magneto as a person, the attempts to keep the character in the present sometimes feel like downright desperation. There was even a point where he was aged down to an infant. Simply put, Magneto is impossible without his past. X-Men. Although Magneto Testament is not the first comic to address Magneto's status as a Holocaust survivor, I believe it's the first to shift the emphasis firmly from superheroics to the Holocaust. I was shocked to learn that it was mostly a Holocaust-related story. Max doesn't know he has powers, since he doesn't find them out until after the war in the comics, and the comic refuses to show them, instead focusing on situations where Max may have unintentionally used his powers. If not for the title and the cover, this could easily pass for a comic about a regular boy. The comic's author, Greg Pak, discusses his commitment to historical accuracy in the additional material. There are notes for each issue outlining the decisions made regarding Max's historical setting, such as the decision to have him German rather than Polish, and even lesson ideas for educators who wish to use this medium for this subject, like the existence of the Sonderkommando and how starving the Poles and the Jews were in Nazi-occupied Poland. I learned information about the Holocaust that I'd never known. Knowing that they were hungry is one thing. Knowing that Jews only received less than 200 calories per day is quite another. It's compelling because of how honestly it portrays the Holocaust. However, this young man could only be Magneto. When Max decides to take a stand toward the end of the comic, there's a stunning and cruel allusion to the "first they came" adage, as Max discusses instances in which he and his family held back out of fear of deaths that nonetheless occurred. Even though Max doesn't yet recognize that he's a mutant, you see how this will affect him and put him on the route to becoming Magneto, which is a devastating realization. He's simply aware firsthand of the brutality with which the majority can treat the minority. It's a beautiful character study that has a profound impact.
My legions await my command, pledging body and soul to me. With a single word,
How powerful is Magneto to threaten the X-Men so often? Magneto possesses the ability to feel and control magnetic fields of all kinds, whether it's normal magnets, metals, electromagnets, or bioelectrical patterns in living beings. He can control them all. The Earth's magnetic field is very useful to him because it provides him a base to work off of, meaning that no matter what, Magneto is never truly powerless. He's been shown to be able to control metals in the tiniest quantities available, from pulling out metal from the ground beneath him to controlling the iron from within a person's bloodstream. Nothing ferrous escapes him. Even adamantium Strontium, the strongest metal there is just another plaything for him. Magneto is capable of producing electromagnetic fields powerful enough to control non-ferrous objects, although he might simply be employing anti-gravity fields. With the help of his magnetic abilities, he's lifted thousands of tons, carrying around an entire stadium in the sky, for example. But the more effort he puts into it, the more strain on his body and mind he experiences. Magneto can enhance his physical characteristics by turning his magnetic abilities inward, and because of this, he's noticed an improvement in his stamina, physical strength, and speed of reaction. For self-defense, Magneto can create powerful magnetic force fields, intense electromagnetic pulses, and electrical or magnetic energy bursts. He can use his abilities to assemble complicated machines in a flash as well, probably to an extent due to his military experience and general intelligence. Despite the fact that controlling magnetism is his core skill, Magneto can control any kind of electromagnetic energy. This includes radio waves, gamma rays, visible light, ultraviolet light, and even X-rays. Magneto mostly works with magnetism because he finds it harder to manipulate other forms of energy. Magneto's powers have been significantly diminished as a result of being exposed to a Phoenix Force attack. He's demonstrated his limitations by only being able to destroy a small number of Sentinels at once and has been forced to become more accurate in his strikes, leading to a rise in the use of metallic objects as projectiles. Magneto's also demonstrated that he's capable of abruptly overexerting himself to his detriment. Magneto has demonstrated the ability to fly and wield his powers precisely and accurately despite these restrictions. He recently caused a tower to collapse in a fit of wrath. This might indicate that his powers are regaining some of their previous grandeur, or that under the influence of powerful emotions, they become more potent than they are right now. This is something that was incorporated into the movie X-Men First Class, where we see Charles helping Eric to control his emotions in order to maximize his output on command, rather than only during emotional outbursts. Magneto has mastered the techniques required to defend his mind from even the most potent telepathic attacks, while also having spent a lot of time working on devices to defend against mental attacks, in part because of his longtime friendship with Charles Xavier. Magneto's demonstrated his ability to repel the infiltration of exceptionally powerful psychics like Xavier and Emma Frost, even without his helmet. This probably has something to do with how the helmet works. It creates some sort of a field that protects the wearer from telepathy. Over the many years of wearing the helmet, it's possible that Magneto's developed a sense of how that field functions. This is probably why his mind is a fortress, even without the helmet. His helmet significantly strengthens his already incredibly strong mental fortitude, whose telepathy Magneto resisted even when she possessed the Phoenix Force, though with great effort. Brilliant in many cutting-edge fields, including genetic mutation, particle physics, engineering, and robotics, Magneto is a scientist who stands out in these fields. His brilliance has allowed him to create several complex machines, most of which are much beyond the limits of current science. He's developed advanced robotics, space stations, apparatus that can only be used to stifle his own mutant abilities, earthquake and volcano generators, and telepathy-blocking technology. He has the capacity to clone fully developed humans, produce synthetic life forms like Alpha, the ultimate mutant, and modify people to endow them with superhuman skills. Magneto is capable of holding his own in a battle and has some military training in hand-to-hand fighting, though he normally favors using his mutant powers. Even at his senior age, he still has excellent physical condition and is a skilled athlete. Magneto has a great deal of combat experience and is a great thinker, both in real-world combat and in chess games. He's fought alongside teams of superhuman foes like the X-Men and the Avengers and effectively held his own. Magneto can speak a ton of languages fluently. Most of these are European languages, since that was where he spent most of his life. However, his intellect knows little bounds, since he even managed to decipher a lost civilization's language. The goal of Magneto's helmet was to shield him against psionic and telepathic attacks. This is made possible by Magneto's own invention of technology that's hooked into the helmet. The helmet has evolved into a sort of emblem, and is now an essential component of Magneto's persona. T-shirts with the slogan "Magneto was right" and an image of Magneto wearing his helmet were first worn as a sign of rebellion by disaffected mutant youngsters after Magneto was believed to have died following the Sentinel attack on Genosha. Magneto actually built the armor he wears by using his magnetic powers to create it. He's also further protected from various sorts of physical harm by the suit, which is constructed of a variety of thin yet highly strong metallic alloys. After losing much of his power as a result of coming into contact with the Phoenix Force, Magneto's resorted to donning new clothing, including a utility belt. He's shown a preference for keeping small metallic objects in his pouches that can be used as weapons, like nails. When not wearing his suit, Magneto always carries little blades and bullets with him.
Is this what you want from me? Is this what I am?
Would it be wise to make him a hero in MCU? Both Magneto's and the X-Men's entry into the MCU are inescapable. There haven't been many of the more notable villains exposed, but it won't be long until we meet this person. But since Lanchier has been familiar to fans since the early 2000s, Kevin Feige might choose to take a different approach with the character. Perhaps Magneto should play the hero. Since fans have been exposed to the charismatic villain for the past 20 years, they're well familiar with his methods. Magneto has been the X-Men's most frequent nemesis, just like in the comics, appearing both on his own and with other bad guys, such as in XMen Apocalypse. The character has taken on an anti-hero persona over the years, joining up with the X-Men to take on more powerful enemies, but these alliances have never lasted because he invariably betrays them to further his own objectives. It's safe to assume that the villainy of the character has been exhausted, so perhaps it's time for a new approach. In recent years, Magneto's objectives in the comics have evolved from being a villain who wants to annihilate people for mistreating mutants to merely wanting to secure the safety of his people. If the MCU shows how the X-Men come together after they've all developed their abilities, fans may witness Magneto's ascension from the very beginning. Because of his experience as a Holocaust survivor, he's always been a likable character. Even with a different backstory, he'd still be a tragic man and therefore an intriguing character. Should he ever turn evil again, it would also support his notions of humanity. As evidenced by Taskmaster from Black Widow and Killmonger from Black Panther, Marvel Studios has developed a practice of reimagining elements of its most well-known characters. The same will probably be done with this legendary figure, which will allow Eric Lanchier to be redefined for years to come. There's no disputing the excellence of Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen's performances, but a new actor in the role will have the opportunity to bring something fresh and interesting to the table. Additionally, there's a ton of unrealized storytelling possibilities that the X-Men movies have never explored. One such tale has the metal-bending bad guy in charge of a newly founded mutant nation where he assumes a more protective role. He'll have to maintain his realist values, since fans would certainly protest a new portrayal if it strays too far from his comic counterpart. But there's an opportunity to see facets of the character the movies haven't explored as much. One, when it comes to persuasion, Magneto is incredibly magnetic. Eric has such strong beliefs in his principles that he can persuade anyone to support them with the skill of a career politician. He may be the greatest hero and the biggest villain with the mere force of his words. He'll have to maintain his realist values, since fans would certainly protest a new portrayal if it strays too far from his comics counterpart. So, there you have it, guys. An extensive origin video for Magneto. It's been an absolute blast going through all the lore surrounding and encompassing him. His mutant abilities are nearly boundless, and his genius calculating brain isn't to be taken lightly either. It's quite clear that though this character has a lot of greys, he does often think in black and white, and that's why he's most often hated by others. We do understand his motives given his upbringing, and that just goes on to give us even more reason to look forward to what will happen in the future. How will he progress? How will his character develop even further? Let us know what you think, and thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.